well. That's an important thing to do. All right, so we're just gonna start here. So hi everybody who was able to make it. I'm Sheila. I'm Signet's president and COO, and I regularly give talks like this, usually about once a month, on some aspect of the U.S. college application process. And one of the things that we've seen a lot is that there are kind of two groups of people who really need this information. I mean, everybody kind of needs this information, but there are two groups of people that I really want to speak to specifically tonight. And that is, people who live abroad but want to send their kids to a US college. And also those people who live in the US but maybe were educated abroad and so need to understand this system that they're kind of unfamiliar with. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. And that's what I mean when I say international families. So I started my screen share. I hope that um, works. And Baha, I'm just going to stop your video so we can just be focused here. But if you have any questions, feel free to come off of mute or put a question in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor that as we go along, and you can interrupt me with any questions you have. So today I want to talk about how to navigate this process. And it's not going to be like tactical, you do this, you do that, you do this, which we can talk about. But I really want to set the tone for kind of the mindset that you should approach this process with, because that is one of the biggest differences between non-US systems and the US system of college admission. So we're going to dive in here. The first thing that we're going to talk about are some of the major differences between what happens in the US when you're thinking about going to college or university and what happens elsewhere. And of course, there are thousands of differences, but I'm going to focus on three here. One is the focus of the curriculum. So in the United States, we have what we call a liberal arts education system. And liberal arts doesn't only mean humanities. You could be studying biology or engineering, and it would be within a liberal arts college. What that means is we want a broad set of subjects for students to study, and then they will specialize, right? So even if they come in and they know we're going to do biotechnology or something very specific and technical, most colleges in the United States will also say, well, you need to take a basic writing course. You need to take something in a foreign culture or language. You need to do some history. You need to do, a requisite math and requisite science, and maybe even a philosophy or a psychology course, right? There are core or distribution requirements that require students to kind of get this broad base of education in addition to the specialization that comes along with their major or the specific kind of program they're doing. And that's very different, right? Abroad, usually what happens is a student is choosing their major, which is usually quite closely tied to a career path, and they choose that before they even get to university. And then their university program is very focused on preparing them for that path. So that's one of the biggest differences. Another big difference here is the application process. So my parents always talk about how when they finished their, initial studies, they took a big exam and that told them what colleges they could go to and what subjects they could study based on their performance on that exam. Well, here that's not the case. And we have some elements that are like that. You hear about the SAT and the ACT, but they don't play that kind of outsized role in where a student can go to college. They do play a role, and that role is always changing, especially since the pandemic. We've had more colleges move away from testing requirements. But it's not the kind of end all be all of the deciding factors of where you can go and what you can study. There are lots of factors that play into the application process in the United States, and they're all weighed a little bit differently at each school and even for each student, depending on where their strengths show up. So that's a very different thing here. It also leads to a lot of complexity and nuance and confusion. And in some ways, it feels a little bit like a black box. We can talk about how things work in a college admissions office, but we can't say for sure exactly how your student is going to be read, right? And that leads to a lot of frustration and anxiety, of course. The third thing that I want to highlight here is the evaluation criteria is very different. As I kind of threw out this example, sometimes it's a big test. Sometimes it's your grades in your undergraduate. Sometimes it's a recommendation that get the most attention from the admissions officer, depending on how they want to weigh all of these things. But the evaluation criteria in the US are very different from abroad. The National Association of College Admissions Counselors, which is NACAC for short, of which we are a member, puts together this survey every year of colleges and what are the most important factors. And those factors have been fairly stable for the last 10, 15 years. The first is grades. The second is the rigor of the curriculum. How hard are those courses that students are earning the grades in? And for a long time, the third was test scores, but that's changed in the last several years now that, we have a majority of schools being test optional, which means you can submit if you want to, but you don't have to in order to apply. So what's happened now is the criteria have shifted, and grades and rigor are still important, still the most important, but character is now the third most important factor in college admissions. And so we're going to talk about what does that mean and what can you do to make sure that your student is doing all the things that they need to do. But those criteria, especially character, is kind of an umbrella term for a lot of different things, and things that are really emphasized in US systems of education that are not usually emphasized in others, like community service or extracurriculars or sports, may not be part of the school curriculum somewhere else the way they are here in America. It's just kind of what every kid does, and you have to do it because your school has all of these opportunities, or they're encouraging you to do it in different ways. So I just want to sort of set the stage. We've got a different system. And so you really need to try to put aside the things that you might have gone through when you were applying to your university programs, and really understand how it works here in the United States, because a lot of people end up kind of conflating the two. I know my parents did when I was going through the college process, and that made it harder for us to really focus on what was important in the process. So what does matter in US college admissions? Academics, again, number one. But the third thing now is character. And to round out our framework, I add engagement, because it's one thing to have good grades and to have good character. It's another thing to put those things into practice, right? And that's where that engagement comes in. So I like to call it the ACE framework. It's a convenient acronym and hopefully easy to remember. And we've been using this in some way, shape, or form for really as long as Signet has been in existence, over 18 years now. And it's led to really amazing success for our students. And more than just success in terms of college admissions, they got into this school or that school, which it does lead to. It also leads to a lot of personal growth and students who are really ready to embark on that next stage of their journey into adulthood. And that's one of the things that is really motivating to me. So let's spend a little time talking about academics. Most of us know what this means. We have to have good grades. It doesn't mean you have to have perfect grades, but we do want the majority of our focus to be on performing well in the classes that they're taking. And when we talk about academics, we're also talking about rigor, by which we mean how advanced, how hard, how rigorous are those classes that they are choosing to take. So in most high schools in the United States, we have, your standard level, you might have an honors or an advanced level, and then we have other special levels like advanced placement, AP, or it might be international baccalaureate. It might be some other sort of system that indicates the rigor of the curriculum that the class follows. And then when admissions officers are looking to evaluate a student's academics, they're also looking to see what classes did they choose, right? If there are, make up an example, 4 different advanced English classes, one might be on world literature, British literature, American literature, and maybe science fiction. I don't know, I'm making this up. What did your student choose? And what does that say about what their interests are? Right? And it's not that one is better than the other. It's they're really looking to understand what interests your student, because that tells them something about how your student is going to be on their campus, right? So I always encourage people to let their students take the classes that they find most interesting. Those are number one, going to be the ones they do the best in. And number two, really authentically reflect what their interests are on their transcript. But class choice does matter. And then college admissions officers are also looking at trends. And hopefully what we see is an upward trend. They're very used to seeing that students might have a little bit of a challenge adjusting to high school at the beginning. It's, a totally different system. And especially with the pandemic, their first year of high school is often one of their first years back in person after the quarantine period. So there is another level of adjustment that needs to happen there, and maybe catching up on some material that they had missed or closing some gaps that were created by the lack of instruction during that time. So it's fine if there are not A's from the very start of high school, but we do want to make sure as they get older, as they get more familiar with the high school system, as they learn how to manage their workload, and as they take more advanced classes, that their grades are getting better. Right. And another place we look at trends is if there was maybe a dip in the middle of high school, we want to understand where that dip came from. For some students, we'll talk about this in the next slide, a learning difference may get diagnosed a little later in high school. And that's fine, but we hope that they get the help that they need and then they can get back on trend. Or maybe there was a medical issue or some sort of personal issue that drag their grades down a little bit. You want to provide that context to the colleges. We can talk about how to do that. Other indicators of academic ability would be the SAT or the ACT, less important these days, but even though most colleges will admit freely that they are not a measure of intelligence or academic ability, it's a score that matters for a bunch of complicated reasons related to rankings and things like that, that sometimes they still matter and sometimes are a helpful tool for colleges to evaluate students. There are some colleges that have gone back to requiring the test, but about 80% of them are still test optional right now. And then we have AP and IB scores. If your student is in one of these programs, there may be an additional exam to take. These scores are not really make or break scores. The NACAC survey of important factors lists these somewhere around 10th or 11th in the list of things. So, not very high up on the list, but can be a way to demonstrate additional academic ability. And then whenever an extracurricular pursuit has an academic flavor, might be the math team or the science Olympiad or a literature club or a writing contest or something like that, also reflects something about the student's academics. I'm going to pause for a second here just to see questions here. Oh, this is a great question, Baha. I will come back to it. Okay. Sometimes you face academic challenges, and these are things really to get a handle on early. Sometimes students have lack of focus, lack of motivation. It may not be a learning difference. It could just be they're not really feeling comfortable in the high school environment. They're not seeing eye to eye with the teacher or even with friends. Whatever it is, you kind of want to understand what's happening. Lack of focus and lack of motivation is a symptom, and you want to get to the root. What's the cause? Learning differences and executive functions are much more mainstream challenges these days. I know there's often a lot of shame around them, but really I encourage you to put that aside and get your child the help that they may need. We're learning more and more about neurodiversity all the time, and there are real strengths in all kinds of students, no matter how their brain works. But we also want to make sure we can accommodate so that when they go through this very sort of standardized system, the way high school works, they are not being unfairly penalized for the way that their brain works. So we want to make sure they get the support that they need and the accommodations that they may need so that they can perform at their best. And some students just have a lot of anxiety around testing, whether that's the SAT or a math test at the end of the semester. There are also things that can be done around that, just helping build up some tolerance to that kind of stress, putting things in perspective, getting a lot of practice and ensuring them that they are, well prepared can be helpful. And then of course we have mental health challenges, which any of these other bullet points may be leading to, or maybe kind of confusing with. There's an epidemic going on right now, mental health challenges in our young people, and a lot of it comes from academic pressure. So this is an important thing to get a handle of early on, and make sure your student has the right supports in place. But I bring this up to say, especially when I'm talking to international families, either this is not part of the conversation that they're having in their school, there are hard to access, or maybe there isn't access to the kind of supports that might be provided, or there are cultural stigmas against these things or around these things. And in the US, the atmosphere is changing. Of course, there's still some stigma, but it's much more common here. And I I encourage you to look for the strengths in your student and encourage them to lean on those as well, but also get them the support they need. This can be a tricky topic to talk about with your students, but if you have questions about this, let me know. I just think it's really important to, you know, understand the child that you do have, and help them find their strengths. Okay, now we're going to move to character, which I said was the third most important factor in the admissions process. Character is demonstrated. I can't say it's measured. There's no quantitative measure to this, but it's demonstrated in a student's essays that they write for the college, the things that their teachers say about them, in the recommendations, in their extracurriculars, the things that they do outside of school, leadership qualities, and in community service. It tells the admissions officer what these students care about and gives them some indication of what kind of student citizen they will be on the campus, right? And generally, they're looking for positive character traits. And of course, that's a broad and vague category, but generally it's, kindness and accountability and open-mindedness and a willingness to help others, a recognition of what privileges they have and how they could maybe give back. Those sorts of things are becoming increasingly important in the college application process. And almost every college I had students applying to this year had an essay about, like, what kind of person are you? Right? How do you show up in difficult situations? Or give us an example of you being going out of your way to be kind to somebody else. So they really want to learn about this. And I think it's really important for students to understand that, you should have good character traits because that is what makes you a good person, not because a college wants you to have them, right? But this is one place where the college application process may actually help in, having us, raise our children, as opposed to, making you jump through hoops that really have nothing to do with what kind of person they're becoming, or who they're going to be in the future. So I think this is a real opportunity. And the more we can work on things like personal growth, understanding your values and how to make decisions based on your values, living in some sort of alignment and integrity with who you are truly, instead of just trying to present some image of you or try to be who you think someone else wants you to be, pursuing meaning over achievement, and having a sense of purpose and clarity, the better off your kids are going to be as, young adults, because that's what they're about to become, and better off in the college admissions process. And there's nothing really to do here. Like, there aren't tasks you can check off, but these are conversations you can have with your kids. These are things that you can model in your own life. And we'll talk about this, but mentorship is a really great place to help this along, right? So here's some questions that you can kind of work through. What is the culture of my child's school? I think this one's so important because we know how much influence the school culture and the student's peers have on what that student thinks is important and how they set their priorities. Right. So you want to take stock of what is that culture? What am I hearing from my kid? What am I hearing from other parents? And is that the culture I want them in? Or are there ways that I can prepare them to either embrace aspects of that culture or set their own boundaries within that culture. And along with that is what's the culture of our home, right? We all have a culture in our home. It's less likely that you've spent time thinking about how to create it, or, what are your family's values, right? They just kind of happen. But if you can reflect on it a little bit and name it, then you can also start working intentionally to make sure that culture is, protected as your student also moves into other cultures, like the school culture or their eventual college culture. Does my child have mentors? I think this is a really, really important one. This is the best way to make sure your student is growing and reflecting and, getting prepared for this process, which is really quite stressful and makes students quite anxious and doubt themselves a lot and compare themselves to other people. If they have mentors that they trust, that you also trust, they'll be much better prepared to handle it, right? They'll have someone that they can go to with their questions, someone that they feel comfortable being vulnerable in front of, sharing deeply with them, and getting advice. And then this is one that I really love, is I ask all of my students, how do you want to show up in the world? Oftentimes when we're talking to young people about their future, we say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And by that, we usually mean, what kind of job do you want to have? But how do you want to show up in the world is much more about the kind of person you want to be, right? What are your aspirations for yourself? Not for your job title or your bank account, but what kind of person do you want to be in the smallest of interactions, or even in, the bigger ones? So I want to give you an example of how that comes up in our work here. So this is a screenshot of a spreadsheet that I use with students. There are many more columns off to the side here, but I usually start here with students. This is what this looked like for a student that I started with in the middle of 10th grade. We spend about 10 minutes just saying, okay, how do you spend your time outside of school? And this spreadsheet is set up so that once they complete it, they can just kind of take the information from here straight into their college application. We don't have to do a bunch of reformatting or rewriting. And this is a work in progress. We build on it as we go along. But he started with me in the middle of 10th grade, and this is what we came up with. These are the things that he does, roughly in order that he prioritizes them, right? He does work on the robotics team. He's on the tennis team, and he plays in a tennis club. He's on the math team, and he goes to this Chinese school where he learns Chinese language, elements of culture, and I believe there's some math that was going on there too. And we sat down, we looked at this, and I said, well, okay, this shows me a student who, has some academic interests, maybe enjoys tennis or is athletic. And then I'm not sure if he's interested or not, but likely his parents are making him go to this Chinese school. I see a kid who is a good kid, probably a good student, but where is the fun here? Where are the elements of joy? Where's the adventure? Where's the curiosity? And where is the giving back? Right? I'm always looking for that. And, this, I think, was the first time anybody had given him a chance to say, this is how I want to spend my time, instead of just, you have to be involved in extracurriculars, just choose some things and do them. Right. And, it turned out he did really like a lot of these things, but he had never really thought about why. So we talked then about why he liked them, where the joy was, all of those things. And over time, we started thinking about other ways that he could add those things into his portfolio. I'll show you what it looked like in the middle of 12th grade in a minute. But that's how I started the conversation with him about character, right? This is how you're showing up in the world right now. How do you want to show up in the world? What's missing for you, right? And what also might be, whether it's missing, it's not on the list yet. There's the other option of, there's something on the list that actually doesn't reflect something that you care about, something that's meaningful to you, or something that demonstrates a value, right? What might we want to take off the list? Right? So we're really connecting that discussion of values to how they spend their time and how they set their priorities. And that's where we start to get into the last element of the framework, which is engagement. And engagement means a lot of things, but at the most basic level for me, it means how are you taking these academic interests and this knowledge of self and values, and how are you demonstrating it? How are you putting it into action? And that might be in the classroom, how you treat other people, how you engage with your teachers or the material that you're learning. It might be in your broader school community, let's say student government, right? That's like service to your school community, which is great. It might be in your home, right? And this is one that I struggle with a lot. There are certain values that, of course, I want in my home culture, and my 6-year-old doesn't always want to play by those rules. And of course, our kids are different when they're out of the home than when they are at home. But how can we bring those things into alignment? What can we do to kind of create those conditions where that engagement can be the same? Of course, your community, this could be a religious community, a cultural community, your neighborhood, your town, your state. It could get bigger than that, right? We don't have to set our sights for like the most impressive, the most far-reaching kind of impact, but I encourage you to think small, and then it will snowball. I like to see students using their values and strengths to solve problems for other people. It's great at baseline if they can use their values and strengths to solve their own problems. And this is a really empowering way to help them navigate whatever challenges they're facing, especially if they're facing a learning difference or something like that, to help them see what their strengths are and how they can use those to navigate whatever they're up against. But then you want to take it a step further. How can you use those values and strengths to solve problems for other people? What kind of impact could you have? And who do you want to have it on? Why do you care? Right. And this is them starting to kind of form ideas even about what kind of career path or academic path that they might want to take, or what else might they want to do in their extracurricular time. And then I think the engagement piece of this is also essential for them starting to take ownership of their own path and developing responsibility for themselves, right? And high school is this very interesting time. Not only are we expecting our kids to be more and more independent and be ready to leave the home, um, we are also in many ways a little more controlling, and we are by which I mean we are more explicit with our expectations and less with like, you're not going to tie your kids' shoes anymore, but you are going to tell them, I expect this, and this, right? And in some ways, kids are like fighting that because they want their independence. They're going through adolescence. They are trying to expand their horizons. And we are trying to keep them safe and trying to make sure they're on the like right path to get to the college that we think is going to be best for them. But this is a really great time of their life to start practicing how to make good decisions, how to be responsible, and how to understand that they are the owners of their life. They are the ones who are going to shape their journey. So whatever you can kind of let go of, within reason, to give them ownership of, the better off they'll be going through this process. The engagement piece is where, you can talk the talk of, oh, I'm involved in this, or I care about this, but this is where you walk the walk. And colleges are looking to see this, right? If I've got a student who is writing about how much they want to become a doctor and help people in need, but I look at their activity list and there's nothing on there that is helping other people, or nothing on there that's related to health sciences, or the particular population of people they say they want to help, I'm not going to believe it. Right? This is where the rubber meets the road, and you've got to prove it. And instead of thinking about, oh, I got to do this thing because it's going to look good on the college application, really, I encourage students to see the present moment as an investment in their future, right? You want to take advantage of every educational opportunity and extracurricular opportunity and social opportunity right now, because it's going to pay off in the future, right? You're going to learn more about yourself, about your interests, about how to deal with other people. And it's going to put you in a really great position as you're applying to college. And then I like to encourage people to focus on process over results. I get a lot of calls from parents who say, well, my kid needs to go to, I'm going to make up a school, Princeton. So I want them doing this, this, and this. And that's fine. You know, everyone is allowed to have dreams for their kids. But when we start to get overly focused and attached to that result, the Princeton part of that equation, we lose focus on the authenticity, the meaning, and the motivation that are actually going to get you there. Right. So it's almost a self-sabotaging move to focus too much on the specific school or even the specific type of school that you want to go to. You really need to focus instead on, you know, being the most engaged student, having, you know, a clear sense of your own character traits and demonstrating them. Because those are the kids who we can see, oh, they're destined for this type of school, right? Not because they're focused on that school, but because they're focused on the now. All right, so I'm going to go back to my middle of 10th grade student. This is where he started, right? And we talked about how else do you want to show up in the world and where's your joy and all of that. This is where he ended up. In the middle of 12th grade, he's submitted his college applications. This is what it looks like. He continued on with a number of those activities, right? They're all actually here. We've got the robotics, the math team, the tennis team, and the Chinese school are here. But he added in game design club. And this is not just designing video games, it's also designing board games, but he really loved the logic of it and thought it was a great, you know, complement to what he was learning with math team and robotics. And he also just had a lot of fun there. He's a kid who loves puzzles. And he went for it, and I was really proud of him. Tennis is still there. He made it onto the varsity team. And then we were looking for, like, where's the giving back? And he was able to add two things. One was something he was already doing. He's spending so much time at this Chinese school. He found a way to start a volunteer corps within it to help set up the events for the school. He ended up being a volunteer teacher for younger kids there. And then they started doing service projects. As a group, they would go, you know, once every other month or something and go volunteer here or there. And so that was not a huge addition of time for him. It was a place he was already going in a community he already knew. Right. But he was able to turn it into an opportunity to give back. And then he added on this Waterfire. He's in Providence, Rhode Island. I don't know if any of you know Waterfire, but it's a really interesting arts organization. He volunteers there every weekend. He started over the summer. It was not something that he has spent a lot of time doing, but he enjoyed it a lot and he got out of his comfort zone. And I was really proud of him for that. And then in addition to his robotics work, you know, he's gotten a lot more interested in computer science and electrical engineering. And so he did some summer courses. That's what these two are, that are related to his academic interests. So now I see, okay, here's a kid who I get his academic interest. I can understand his character a little bit better too. I can understand who he is as a person. And I see that he is really engaged in his community and in his school. He's engaged with his own learning, right? And this was not like me saying, you have to do this, or his parents forcing him to do this or that. When we started asking that question, how do you want to show up in the world? He came up with these ideas, right? We had to guide him a little bit and help some of that, but he came up with the ideas. And that's what you really want for your student. Makes this process so much easier. Okay, so I'm going to transition to questions in just a moment here, but I want to leave you with a couple of takeaways. Like, what do you do as a parent to do this? One is just give them some space. Give them some space. Understand that they are trying to figure out who they are in the world. And it's a very difficult time. I don't know if you remember when you were in adolescence, but give them the space for that and show them how you've done it. Then the other point is that there are a lot of distractions everywhere. And sometimes this is in the form of, rumors that you're hearing at school, or little kind of fires that pop up that are really not that important, but feel really important. But, you can provide mentorship to them to help them stay focused on what really matters. Um, and I mean, you can mentor them or you can help them find a mentor to help them find that perspective, because that's really important at this age. And then the last one is not to lose yourself in the process, right? This is what I was talking about, getting like overly attached to the name of a particular school or admission somewhere here or there. It's very easy to look at this process and say, oh, there's so many things to do. I'm just going to go in and like manage this project. And there's some baseline amount of that you will have to do if you want to support your kid through this, but don't get lost in those weeds, right? You got to stay focused on what really matters, which is your child getting enrolled in their own adulthood, developing into the young person that you hope that they would be, right? And that can't be micromanaged. So that's what I'll leave you with. We have a program that starts in 9th and 10th grade that does all of this work. Of course, we can't do it without a parent, but it integrates the coaching work that's helps a student understand their strengths, their values, their goals, how they want to show up in the world, integrates that on a regular basis, starting in 9th grade to help them take this journey all the way through the college admissions milestones like testing and the college list and all of the essays and things like that. And I just love this graphic that it is a windy path. It's not a straight line. And it's a really beautiful journey that we love to take alongside of our students. So let me know if you want more information about this program. It's really pretty special. But now we'll go to questions. I'm going to leave this screen up while we go through questions. If you want, you can scan these QR codes on my LinkedIn page. I share a lot of free advice and perspectives, highlight other people. I have a free parent community on a platform called Circle, which has all kinds of advice and tips and tools and open office hours where you can just come and ask whatever questions you have every other week. And then here's the cover image for my podcast, which I hope you listen to. We do a weekly episode where I bring in experts to talk about different aspects of navigating the US academic system and the college process. With that, I'm going to take a sip of water and I'm going to open it up for questions. I know we had one in the chat previously, so we'll come back to that while the rest of you are thinking about your questions. Baha asked, if a person is applying from Austria, I thought that taking the SAT or ACT would be helpful given the differences in the grading system. Okay, so there are a couple of pieces to this question. One, yes, if you've got a different grading system, you're going to want to make sure that the colleges that you're applying to have a good understanding of that grading system. Now, there are third-party services that will translate a high school transcript, actually any level of transcript, both in terms of language, but also in terms of grading system into the US system. The one that we often refer people to is called World Educational Services, just WES.org, I believe. And colleges, most of them divide up their admissions officers by region, and there will be internationally focused admissions officers whose job it is to understand that curriculum, that grading system, the schools in whatever countries they're responsible for, right? So there'll be some baseline familiarity there. Some schools for a while were requiring international students to still take the SAT or the ACT, even if the college policy was test optional. I believe that's far less common now than it used to be. But you're still going to want to check with the specific school that you plan to apply to, what are their testing policies and what is required. Usually, if you're educated outside of the US, they're going to have you take the TOEFL or the IELTS or a Duolingo exam to prove some English proficiency. There may be other testing requirements that you'll have to do alongside of that. So check that. But to get to your actual question, is it helpful to put up a standardized test score to kind of assure, I'm reading into your question here, Baha, but to kind of assure the college admissions offices that, yes, my child is competitive on the same standards as all of these other applicants? The answer is the answer that I will give to even non-international students, US students who ask this question. The SAT, the ACT is only going to be helpful to you if the score is above the average for the colleges you're applying to, right? So if you're a student from Austria and you're applying to, let's say, Georgetown, well, Georgetown's a bad example because they do require tests. So let me choose a University of Virginia, let's say. If you're a foreign student applying to University of Virginia, you want to look at their average test score, which off the top of my head is probably somewhere in the high 1400s. And if your test score is higher than that, then yeah, submit a test score. That's going to help you. But if it's not higher than that, you're better off applying test optional, right? And new data, actually, the government collects this data every year. The data for last year's admitted class was just released like this week. And so there's a lot of great data out there. It's usually not in a very consumable format, unfortunately, but there's data out there that shows you what percentage of admitted and enrolled students at various colleges actually submitted test scores. So you can then see how many got in without test scores. Right. And the numbers might surprise you. It's something like 30% at University of Pennsylvania or 45% at Vanderbilt University, some very selective universities. NYU, I think I was surprised. It was like 70% were admitted without test scores. So it is definitely possible to apply and be admitted without test scores. It's a long, rambling answer, but I hope I got to the main points that you needed to hear. Baha.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And I remember your advice about being the higher than the average score for the previous event. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. Great. What other questions do we have? We have another 15 minutes here. Elizabeth, I got a great question from you. Coming from Europe as parents and raising kids in the US, we struggle with the culture of needing all A's, even if taking honors or AP classes. What's your advice on how to prioritize grades, maybe over mental health and balance? Oh, this is such a good question. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about know the culture of your school. There are some schools where, whether it comes from like the school administration or just the type of kids who attend that school, they are obsessed with their grades and they're very competitive about them, publicly competitive with other students, right? That can be quite dangerous and leads to a lot of pressure and anxiety on for students. So I'm always going to say your mental health is more important than your grades. There is somebody, I'm going to botch this quote, but they said the difference between a 99 and like a 94 is a life. And what I mean by that is a 99 is an A, a very strong A, and 94 might be an A- at some schools. But if you think about like what that means for a student, it could be a lot. It could be, the appropriate amount of sleep at night, like actual time with friends that help you feel loved, and help you have fun. It might mean just less pressure, right? And it's still a great grade. It's still an A-. It's still an excellent grade. So I think that this kind of perfectionism around grades can be really counterproductive. And you also want to think about, I know I've said grades are the most important factor, but in the most selective colleges in the United States, they use something called holistic admissions, which means there's no formula that 50% of our decision is going to be based on your grades and 25% is going to be based on your leadership. There's no hard and fast formula. It shifts for every student they're looking at because they do want to create a group of students that they admit that have different kinds of strengths. And some of those may be academic strengths. Some of those may be artistic or athletic or extra, some extracurricular or leadership strengths or other kinds of things, right? And that means they have to treat every application a little bit differently, right? So, if you have a student who maybe has a A- average instead of an A, but that A-, the time that they saved and the pressure that they save themselves allows them to do even more impactful work and meaningful stuff in their community or within their school, or just be like a really creative, interesting person, because they have a life, that person might be more interesting to me as an admissions officer than the other, right? And you can look at the stats of how many, valedictorians and perfect SAT score students that a place like Harvard rejects, right? Getting perfect grades and perfect scores is not a guarantee that you're going to get in, right? In the US system, it's really about all of this other stuff too, right? So I don't know if I can talk about balance here. I think it's like prioritize their mental health, but make sure they're looking for challenges too, right? They're not shying away from challenges, right? And you can support them in tackling those challenges with systems and mentors and maybe a tutor or something like that. But they should be. I always talk about like living on the edge of your ability. I mean, sometimes that can be a recipe for burnout, but like pushing yourself just to see what you're capable of, but also knowing what your boundaries are and knowing like what actually matters. What should your priorities be? And that's another place where these values can really come in and help a student kind of right size the amount of effort that they're putting into various things, because they can't put 100% into 100% of the things. That is not realistic. Right. So where are the areas that they should invest their time is a good question to go over with them.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Right. Do we have other questions? Feel free, come off mute, put in the chat. No. Okay. Well, to wrap up, I want to tell you about a boot camp that I'm doing for international families, just like you. It's 4 hours over 4 weeks where we will go into detail and I will give you tools and talk tracks and like actual data to be able to navigate all of this. And I think it'll really set you up for success and help you understand the system and what you're going to need to do, what's actually important. And you can use the code ACE for $50 off. And then always feel free to email me. I'm happy to have a call with anybody and talk through your specific situation, or join my office hours on Circle, or you can call us with your questions. But thank you for joining me tonight. I appreciate your time. And hopefully we'll see you at another one of these soon.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.